The bowler blade. This is the surface area where you see the fat content, and that is the underside of the bowler blade. Right about here is where the oyster blade sits. And this leaner piece of meat here is a part of the petite tender. So a very simple execution today. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to remove a lot of the extra muscles that make this product as complicated as it appears. But we're doing that for the reason of making sure that we can deliver really high quality food service style products. Importantly, center plate profile is what we're looking for. So what we're going to do is, again, every muscle is separated by either a piece of silver skin or a fat selvage. So removing it is just a matter of using your fingers to find where those pockets of fat or sinew sit, which makes that whole job of removing extra muscle that little bit easier. That is the shoulder portion of the triceps group. Actually very good to braise, also really can be turned into a nice little pot roast as well. I'm going to put that aside a little bit later. We're going to run around on the outside edge of the meat and pick up, there's a lateral muscle that hangs around the outside of this meat. And it's quite ropey in texture and always good to remove. We're going to pick up the petite tender. You can see as I free that meat away a little bit, you can see that the petite tender starting to surface, so you can see it a little bit more clearly. There it is sitting in that shape there. Now unfortunately in the boning room, which happens a little bit unfortunately, there's some of the top of that petite tender's been scalloped out in the boning process. But we're still going to be able to pick up quite a user-friendly portion of the petite tender. It's actually a wonderful steak, a very delicious steak. Characteristic of it, the shape it sits, it bunches up a lot through the cooking process and is quite difficult to cook in that it takes a lot longer than would be anticipated, but it's certainly a really excellent piece of meat. So I'm just going to trim that petite tender up, and we'll show you how that product is presented. So what we've done is just remove that small amount of silver skin at the front, a small amount of fat, the petite tender. We remove the shoulder muscle, and now we're left with the body of the bowler blade. Now, the unique thing about this cut, it's very affordable, so we can afford to be a little bit rough with our trimming, and I'm saying that so that we can affect a really good plate profile shape. I basically want to look for a food service type outcome from this. So one of the characteristics of a bowler blade is there is a heavy nodule of silver skin that starts at the tip of the bowler blade, and it runs through, and as it goes towards the middle of the product, it sort of starts to dive in. What we're going to do is literally sacrifice some yield in order that we can leave a square or oblong shape so that we can then split that and turn that into two logs. So right now I'm starting my knife roughly about 1 inch to 1.5 inches down, with the idea of taking all the curve out of the top of this piece of meat. So we're just going to slide the knife through, taking with it most of that silver skin, and at the same time we're evening out that product. You can see what we've done. We've just removed a thick portion. I've also done that on purpose. Silver skin is a casserole or a ragu's best friend when it comes to cooking, because through the cooking process, of course, that silver skin will render and make that meat more delicious. So I've added a layer of meat so we can deliver perfect cubes of meat with just a small amount of silver skin sinew on top of that. Through the rendering process, that's going to add to the actual overall eating quality. But that will go into our diced product. What you can see now is we basically have our meat, and just going to manipulate that shape slightly so that I can take a portion from this, and again, as I said earlier, deliver that food service type shape. So that's where our meat sits. We want to take a line through the middle so that we get basically 2 even portions. And with our knife, it's going to cut straight through there now, delivering our 2 portions of bowler blade. I'm just going to go through that process now of breaking down the muscle structure, squaring off the ends, and we will turn this into that nice round shape that you would expect in food service, and we're going to talk about how we can cut that up. So I've just manipulated that beef, broken down the structural fibre. That enables me to get a perfectly round shape, perfect for food service, with the centre of plate profile. Now, I want to hold that in position. So if whatever we're doing with this, whether we're roasting it or whether we're going to slice it in portions into steak, we can use some of our food grade food bands just to help hold that in position. Particularly if you're going to roast this piece of meat, probably add a little bit of the leftover fat that you have, let it sit on top and let it naturally baste the meat through the cooking process. But this cut is actually a really exciting piece of meat, and it's actually suitable for a lot better purpose than just roasting it. And what I have with me right now is just a really simple plastic bag. I'm just going to pull that in really tightly. And then what we'll do is just insert that into a tight fitting bag. So I've cut this bag so that we've got a nice cylinder type shape, and by wrapping that tightly and just inserting that into the front of the bag, we can actually just hand pipe that in. Remember the technique: pulse the meat, squeeze the back of the bag, pulse the meat, squeeze the back of the bag, and as you can see, we now have produced a very suitable food service shaped product, really suitable for things like sous vide. Now, understanding if the kitchen doesn't have a little vacuum machine that you can make these type of bags with, we've got a number of other options. Remember, it's a secondary cut, so as slow as you possibly can. The big difference, prime cuts you can cook really quickly, but secondary cuts have an extra layer of elastin in a lot of the bundles of fibres, and it's our job as chefs to understand how to cook these, and part of that process is by allowing the oven to do the work. So we bring that temperature up right nice and slowly. We're going to have an outstanding result. Sous vide, if you don't have sous vide, another technique, just take some greaseproof paper, perhaps season this product, roll it tightly once again, and then we're going to finish that in foil, leaving the ends completely clear. Let that set in the refrigerator. That can go directly into a dry cook oven, so low temperature, perhaps 60 degrees. Use an internal thermometer, make sure that you reach your food safety parameters. Bring that temperature up to potentially 50, 55 degrees. Hold it for the set period to ensure that we ensure food safety. But when you're finished, this can be rolled back out, and we can actually use that piece of meat re-fired up on the grill or onto the barbecue. Delicious taste, fantastic flavour profile, and sensationally tender. Then our final one, if it's just a matter of just using a little piece of cling wrap, it's important to set this meat. So once we've made that shape, we've broken down the muscle structure, we just want to give that a really good roll, maybe wrap it up in a bit of cling wrap. Try and make it as even as possible. The strength of your hands is usually sufficient enough to make that quite even. And let that set in the fridge if you can, 12 hours, a little bit longer if possible. What's important, what we now have out of our bowler blade, is 2 high-performing steak type items that we can use a number of different cooking techniques to execute. The other one is a part of our petite tender, a well-known delicious steak. Don't forget that bunches up through the cooking process. Takes a little longer than most cuts to get to our internal temperatures, but well worth the effort. We've got an excellent source of lean meat for our diced meat. Importantly, all from the same muscle group area. We're going to have a consistent cooking process, which is going to lend itself to more consistency in our product. Literally a small amount of silver skin that can actually be put through our minces and into particularly a ragu cook, and a small amount of fat. Zero waste policy tells us this has incredible flavour. Render down that fat, cook it in the oven, bake it until the fat renders away from it, pour it off, and you have an excellent tasting cooking product for your kitchens. With that, thank you and good luck with the bowler blade.